Hey everybody, I'm Stephen Human. Normally I'm an author of sci-fi fiction, sci-fi thriller novels. That's what I do for a living. And I work in video, worked in television for about 15 years. But my love, like my hobby love, has been comic books and action figures from the time I was a little kid. And so what I've started doing is I've started customizing my figures. And I'm just a beginner. I don't have any real experience. I watched a couple of videos, but I kind of wanted to share my experience with my current figure that I'm working on. And I thought you guys might like to join me because I've been having a really, really good time with it. So I've just barely started doing this. I just started basically 2 months ago and I customized my first figure, which was a House of L Superman. So this is Superman in 1,000 years. It was a comic that came out last year. I absolutely loved the character. I don't usually care for future versions of characters because it's always dystopian. This one felt like a really authentic interpretation of where Superman would be in 1,000 years. I absolutely loved it. And I figured there probably won't be a figure of him because he only appears in one comic. So I decided to customize him, and I used a solar suit Superman from McFarlane, and I took him apart, and what I discovered through that first process was just how easy it was, particularly with McFarlane. So I know a lot of you out there love McFarlane action figures, the DC ones. I've totally fallen in love with them. It's kind of all I collect anymore. As you can see, I've collected Marvel. I collect basically everything, every character that I've ever, had any affinity for. But the McFarlane figures have really just excited me. They're awesome. And they're really easy to customize, like amazingly easy. It has been so fun. So I did that with the House of L Superman. And then a couple weeks later, I was like, I want to do Ronan Kent, which is another character from that comic. And so I did. I had an infected Superman, and I took a Jon Stewart head, and from the original Jon Stewart. The second Jon Stewart I also got, but I felt that the head from the first one more represented, they're slightly different heads. I don't know if it was in the plastic they used or what, but the first head seemed to reflect more of Ronan Kent, so I used that one. And I painted him up, and he turned out awesome. Now, one of the things, since this has all been new, I've been experimenting with different paints. And so I kind of wanted to talk about my experience. So I have used just standard craft paint, it's acrylic paint. And that's worked really well for certain things. With Ronan, I used only craft paint, and it didn't work quite as well when it came to the body because it's a little bit thicker and it can scratch off. It's not quite as permanent as I would like, but again, it was experimenting. What I did with the Superman is I spray painted his body with craft spray paint, and that was amazing. That turned out absolutely beautiful. It went on crisp and clean and smooth. It looked like it was professional. And so after doing Ronan Kent, I decided that if in the future I'm doing more full body paints, I'm definitely going to spray paint because it just comes off, it works better and it looks better and it doesn't come off. It's gorgeous. So when I was first working with Superman, I tried a couple different paints, Citadel and Model Air. And again, this is just beginning, so I don't have an airbrush. This is all either spray painted or hand painted with a brush. I haven't gotten to the point of airbrushing yet. I hope to get there, but I'm not there yet. And so I've just been with my hands. So these both worked really nicely because they go on nice and thin. They require extra coats. But that is really wonderful because then you're able to, it doesn't get blotchy with the paint or with the paintbrushes. It doesn't leave lines because it's not thick paint. And that has been wonderful. So I'm moving toward exclusively using these types of paints because of that. But with this current one, so what I'm currently doing is a couple weeks ago, I decided that whenever I came across a McFarlane figure that was deeply discounted, that I was just gonna buy it, no matter what it was, and that I was going to take it apart. So I did that with an infected Shazam, King Shazam. Totally took him apart. I don't know what I'm gonna use him for yet, but he had lots of cool parts and lots of just interesting textures. And so I know that I'll use it for something in the future. And yesterday I was out and at a Best Buy, I found a maskless Shriek. And he was deeply discounted. He was like $7. And so I bought him. And instantly when I looked at him, I was like, he would make a great Brainiac. And so I decided to do it. So I started painting him. So I'll show you here where I'm at. So here's the body right here. And what I did is I took, this one was divided up. I didn't want it, I wanted it to have the textures with the black and the silver. And so I decided not to spray paint it all. So I actually didn't even take him apart because I knew where I was going to be painting. So what I did is I took chrome spray paint, and I would spray it on a paper plate, and it would get thick, and then I painted it with the brush. So it's not as smooth as it would be if I had spray painted, but I was then really easily able to keep all of the blacks really nice without having to repaint those on top of the silver, which I didn't want to do. So whether or not I'll continue that in the future, I have no freaking idea. And then what I decided to do is I took the hands. So you'll see here, the hands of Shriek were these funky, for the character, like these sound things. And I decided that if I could cut the plastic off right here, then they would make the perfect sort of orb so that I could do Brainiac's 3 orbs. So I've cut them. Here's one right here that you can see. It's just little. And I painted it the purple that I got, and the purple paint was absolutely awesome. So this is the paint that I'm using now. This isn't the same color. But so I decided to try model paint, and it was really cheap. It was like $1.99 at Hobby Lobby. And they were good for some things and bad for others. They went on really thick, which caused some problems which I don't like. But the purple that I'm using, which was a metallic purple, actually was really, really great. And then I got a metallic green, and it was really great too, because they would go on thinner, almost like a wash. They were beautiful, but I could still go thick. So anyway, so I took these. So I don't think I'm going to be using those paints again, in all honesty, even though they were cheap. So what I've done is I cut those off. They actually just pop out. These just pop out of Shriek's hand. You can put a little knife and they will pop out. And I took them and I cut a little notch in so that if you see here on his thing, I can glue them and have it fit on there. So that is what my plan is going forward. So I'm going to do that today, and I'll show you as I'm doing that. And then for his hands, I started experimenting with the hands because I wanted them to have, regular hands. But when I started, the balls here are bigger because of Shriek's hands. So the great thing about McFarlane is that everything I found is pretty interchangeable. All of the joints and stuff are the same. So if I wanted to replace his legs, I could put totally different legs on. They would fit perfectly. I want my customized figures to still be figures. I want them to be posable. I want them, if my kids want to play with them, that they can play with them. Not that I usually let them play with my customs, but you get the idea. I wanted them to still be toys. And so I wanted them to have, regular hands, but they wouldn't fit. And then when I knew that I could drill a hole and I could make the hole bigger and they would fit. But then I thought, he's got these big arms, and I didn't want this based off of any specific Brainiac version. There's lots of different Brainiacs. Man, Google images of Brainiac. I mean, because he's been in comics for decades and decades. He's been in cartoons. He's been on TV. And there's no definitive version. So I wanted to kind of have just a unique version of Brainiac. So I wanted to go with the silver and the purple and the green, obviously. But then I thought, he can be anything. So what I did is I had these hands. They're from a 10-inch Black Panther. And they're just extra hands. And I drilled holes in them and fit them. And they're out of scale with the figure itself, but they look really cool because obviously, Brainiac can be anything he wants. He's an alien. Sometimes he's a robot. And so I wanted something that just looked visually cool and interesting. So he's got these oversized hands, which are kind of alien, which I liked. So after I cut out and painted those little plastic pieces, I had these leftovers on the shoulders here. And I thought, that would just look cool, just add something to it. So I just super glued them onto it, and they are firm and they're perfect. They're perfectly round. So it looks like a toy should look. It doesn't look quite as custom as it otherwise would. So before I get into getting into the paint and putting the rest of these things on and showing you how I'm going to do it, let me show you the head. So Shriek's head is very unique. It's got kind of a smirk on it. He's bald, obviously. The skin actually had some texture to it, which was really nice. So what I did is I got 2 different types of green. I got a green that I thought would be the right color, and then I got one that was a little bit more metallic, that was a little bit more of a glaze. And so last night I painted him green, and I wanted to keep the eyes, so I got right around the eyes so that his eyes could remain with the textures, and I let it dry. And then I started to put the glaze on. Well, I didn't wait long enough. I mean, again, this is all, I'm learning all of this stuff. This is all a learning process for me. And so when I started putting the glaze on, it actually softened up the paint underneath and started messing it up and screwing it up. And so the face does not have the texture that it had yesterday, where it was just kind of green. But I kind of like it because around the face it has a lighter green and then in some areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the head, because you can now see through and you can see where the original hair was painted. And so I'm going to paint there, and I'm going to paint down here and get rid of his goatee or his little flavor saver there. But I'm going to try and leave some of the textures around here just because they look very interesting, and I kind of wanted that originally. So we'll see how that goes. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in and just start playing around a little bit, and I'll show you kind of what I'm learning, and hopefully you can learn something and we can go on this journey together. If I'm taking a figure apart, I just will go through and dip them in hot water for about 2 minutes, and then everything comes apart really nicely. With the head, I don't need to do that, so I'm just going to pop the head back on. Just that simple. And that will allow me to kind of have, you know, the freedom. Normally I'll have like a pair of tweezers when I'm painting the head. This will make it just a little bit easier, because since at this point all the details around the edge, I'm just going to be kind of going in here around the jaw and the head, the top of the head, and I think that we should be in good shape. So let's go ahead and do it. What I found with these paints, I don't even know what they're called because they put the label right on top of it, but I guess they're testers paints for, you know, miniatures and models. What I found is that you can't wash them off with water, which sucks. So I've got some alcohol here, and I have to soak my brushes in it in order for it to not suck. So I'm going to go ahead and just put some right in here and get some over the head. But it's been unfortunate because it's damaged some of my brushes, which I don't like. I'm trying to keep that texture of the green. So I'm using this little paintbrush just in here, trying to get it that way. And I'm liking how it's looking, so it's not just straight green. And this paint, it didn't seem to, when it dried, it didn't seem to have too many issues when it came to leaving behind a lot of lines and things. But again, I'm not going to be using this paint again for this type of project. All right, so the face is painted, as you can see, looks pretty good. I've kept sort of the textures on the base. I could add another coat of the green, but I kind of like the contrast between the lighter green and the darker green. It looks a little bit more natural. This face, Shriek's face, actually had a little bit more paint application than most of the faces have. He had like some circles under his eyes. As you can see, I've glued on the other two little of his symbol. You know, he's got that triple symbol. So I glued those, added another little bit of paint to them so that they would shine a little bit. One thing I found with the paints is that like even though these had sat, they were on a softer plastic, and when I pushed them in, my fingers, the oil in my fingers just kind of took off some of the shine, and I couldn't get it back. I even tried cleaning it a little bit, and it was just kind of dull. So I added a little bit more paint to those so that they would shine. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to use fabric paint. Okay, fabric paint is great because it's thick, right? So when it goes on, it adds a layer of thickness. So if I wanted to add some piping in here, I could, and I would use this and then paint that piping, which I might do. I'm kind of debating. But what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna put the dots on his head using this, because then they'll be three-dimensional, they'll dry, they'll adhere to the plastic, because this is basically plastic itself. It sticks really well, and then I can paint that in the same purple, and they'll be raised. So let's go ahead and do it, and hopefully it will work. All right, now I'm gonna try and get this as circular as humanly possible. Let's see if we can do it. Let's do one over here. And then one over here. So you can see how those are on. I went with the white because I think that it will accent the purple a little bit better. All right, so the final steps on the figure was that I took the fabric paint, which is really more of a plastic, and I applied that to the head, and I applied it to just different parts on the body, and I used white because I wanted the purple to stand out. If I just put the purple paint on the black, it really wouldn't stand out at all. But with the white underneath, not only would it have a thicker layer to attach to, but then it would also stand out a little bit more. And so this is the final figure right here. This is our Brainiac. And as you can see, the little plastic parts that I popped out of his hands, they were great. I would, if I had better tools, I might have cut them down a little bit smaller. But I tried that with, because there were two, there was on his hands, there was one here and there was one here. And I tried it with the bigger one, just slicing off the top, and I couldn't get it right, so the two were in slightly different sizes, and I wanted it to be uniform. So I just stuck with these. They come off a little bit, more than I would like, but it still turned out awesome. Now, finally, one thing I learned is that I took the spray paint and I didn't want to take him all apart because all these plastic pieces in the black. So I sprayed the spray paint on, a paper plate and then used a paintbrush. Well, in doing that, the paint and the chemicals kind of separated a little bit. And so on here, the paint had a really hard time actually drying and setting. It was still a little sticky and tacky, and if I pressed my thumb to it for a little bit and pulled off, it would actually pull off some of the paint. So what I did is I took a glaze that I have that just makes things kind of shiny, and I put that over the top of all of the silver. And so when it dried, it was no longer sticky. So it fixed that problem. I put an extra layer over the top and fixed that. So I'm very pleased with how this character turned out. I think next time I would use a more matte finish for the head because his head's a little shiny, but he's an alien, he's Brainiac. I'm fine with that. So there you go. Feel free to leave any comments down below. What I want to do next is I want to do a future state Wonder Woman, but I need to get 3 different figures in order to make that work. Because as you guys know, McFarlane hasn't put out a standard Wonder Woman, but they have a couple. They have one that has more or less the exact suit she wears in Future State, but it has a mohawk, and so I need to play around a little bit with that one. So that'll be my next big project. Hope to bring it to you soon. Until then, this is Superhuman Customs. You have a great day.